focus on how you can overcome your environment and lay some groundwork for the 2 chapters that follow, in which we'll discuss how to overcome your body and time. Before we begin talking about how you can break the habit of being yourself, I want to appeal to your common sense for a few moments. How did this habit of thinking and feeling in the same way over and over begin? I can only answer that by talking about the brain, the starting point of our thoughts and feelings. Current neuroscientific theory tells us that the brain is organized to reflect everything we know in our environment. All of the information we have been exposed to throughout our lives, in the form of knowledge and experiences, is stored in the brain's synaptic connections. The relationships with people we've known, the variety of things we own and are familiar with, the places where we've visited and lived at different times in our lives, and the myriad experiences we've embraced throughout our years are all configured in the structures of the brain. Even the vast array of actions and behaviors that we've memorized and repeatedly performed throughout our lifetimes are imprinted in the intricate folds of our grey matter. Hence, all of our personal experiences with people and things at specific times and places are literally reflected within the networks of neurons, nerve cells that make up our brains. What do we collectively call these memories of people and things that we experience at different times and places in our lives? That's our external environment. For the most part, our brains are equal to our environment, a record of our personal past, a reflection of the life we've lived. During our waking hours, as we routinely interact with the diverse stimuli in our world, our external environment activates various brain circuits. As a consequence of that nearly automatic response, we begin to think and react equal to our environment. As the environment causes us to think, familiar networks of nerve cells fire that reflect previous experiences already wired in the brain. Essentially, we automatically think in familiar ways derived from past memories. If your thoughts determine your reality, and you keep thinking the same thoughts, which are a product and reflection of the environment, then you will continue to produce the same reality day after day. Thus, your internal thoughts and feelings exactly match your external life because it is your outer reality, with all of its problems, conditions, and circumstances, that is influencing how you're thinking and feeling in your inner reality. Every day, as you see the same people, your boss, for example, and your spouse and kids, do the same things, drive to work, perform your daily tasks, and do the same workout, go to the same places, your favorite coffee shop, the grocery store you frequent, and your place of employment, and look at the same objects, your car, your house, your toothbrush, even your own body, your familiar memories related to your known world remind you to reproduce the same experiences. We could say that the environment is actually controlling your mind. Since the neuroscientific definition of mind is the brain in action, you repeatedly reproduce the same level of mind by reminding yourself who you think you are in reference to the outer world. Your identity becomes defined by everything outside of you, because you identify with all of the elements that make up your external world. Thus, you are observing your reality with a mind that is equal to it. So you collapse the infinite waves of probabilities of the quantum field into events that reflect the mind you use to experience your life. You create more of the same. You may not think that your environment and your thoughts are that rigidly similar and your reality so easily reproduced. But when you consider that your brain is a complete record of your past and your mind is the product of your consciousness, in one sense, you might always be thinking in the past. By responding with the same brain hardware that matches what you remember, you're creating a level of mind that is identical to the past, because your brain is automatically firing existing circuits to reflect everything you already know, have experienced, and thus can predict. According to the quantum law, which by the way is still working for you, your past is now becoming your future. Reason this. When you think from your past memories, you can only create past experiences. As all of the knowns in your life cause your brain to think and feel in familiar ways, thus creating knowable outcomes, you continually reaffirm your life as you know it. And since your brain is equal to your environment, then each morning your senses plug you into the same reality and initiate the same stream of consciousness. All of the sensory input that your brain processes from the external world, that is seeing, smelling, hearing, feeling, and tasting, turns your brain on to think equal to everything familiar in your reality. You open your eyes, and you know the person lying next to you is your spouse because of your past experiences together. You hear barking outside your door, and you know it's your dog wanting to go out. There's a pain in your back, and you remember it's the same pain you felt yesterday. You associate your outer, familiar world with who you think you are by remembering yourself in this dimension, this particular time and space. What do most of us do each morning after we've been plugged into our reality by these sensory reminders of who we are, where we are, and so forth? Well, we remain plugged into this past self by following a highly routine, unconscious set of automatic behaviors. For example, you probably wake up on the same side of the bed, slip into your robe the same way as always, look into the mirror to remember who you are, and shower following an automatic routine. Then you groom yourself to look like everyone expects you to look, and brush your teeth in your usual memorized fashion. You drink your coffee out of your favorite mug and eat your customary breakfast cereal. You put on the jacket you always wear and unconsciously zip it up. Next, you automatically drive to work along your accustomed, convenient route. At work, you do the familiar things that you've memorized how to do so well. You see the same people who push your same emotional buttons, which causes you to think the same thoughts about those people and your work and your life. Later, you hurry up and go home, so you can hurry up and eat, so you can hurry up and watch your favorite TV shows, so you can hurry up and go to bed, so you can hurry up and do it all over again. Has your brain changed at all that day? Why are you secretly expecting something different to show up in your life when you think the same thoughts, perform the same actions, and experience the same emotions every single day? Isn't that the definition of insanity? All of us have fallen prey to this type of limited life one time or another. By now, you understand the reason why. In the preceding example, it's safe to say that you're reproducing the same level of mind every day, and that if the quantum world shows that the environment is an extension of your mind, and that mind and matter are one, then as long as your mind remains the same, your life will stay status quo. Thus, if your environment remains the same, and you react by thinking in the same way, then according to the quantum model of reality, shouldn't you create more of the same? Think of it this way. The input remains the same, so the output has to remain the same. How then can you ever create anything new? There is another possible consequence that I should mention. If you keep firing the same neural patterns by living your life the same way each day, every time you respond to your familiar reality by recreating the same mind, that is, turning on the same nerve cells to make the brain work in the same way, you hardwire your brain to match the customary conditions in your personal reality be they good or bad. There is a principle in neuroscience called Hebb's law. It basically states that nerve cells that fire together wire together. Hebb's credo demonstrates that if you repeatedly activate the same nerve cells, then each time they turn on, it will be easier for them to fire in unison again. Eventually, those neurons will develop a long-term relationship. So when I use the word hardwired, it means that clusters of neurons have fired so many times in the same ways that they have organized themselves into specific patterns with long-lasting connections. The more these networks of neurons fire, the more they wire into static routes of activity. In time, whatever the oft-repeated thought, behavior, or feeling is, it will become an automatic, unconscious habit. When your environment is influencing your mind to that extent, your habitat becomes your habit. So if you keep thinking the same thoughts, doing the same things, and feeling the same emotions, you'll begin to hardwire your brain into a finite pattern that is the direct reflection of your finite reality. Consequently, it will become easier and more natural for you to reproduce the same mind on a moment-to-moment basis. This innocent response cycle causes your brain and then your mind to reinforce even further the particular reality that is your external world. The more you fire the same circuits by reacting to your external life, the more you'll wire your brain to be equal to your personal world. You'll become neurochemically attached to the conditions in your life. In time, you'll begin to think in the box, because your brain will fire a finite set of circuits that then creates a very specific mental signature. This signature is called your personality. As an effect of this neural habitation, the two realities of the inner mind and the outer world seem to become almost inseparable. For instance, if you can never stop thinking about your problems, then your mind and your life will merge together as one. The objective world is now colored by the perceptions of your subjective mind, and thus reality continuously conforms. You become lost in the illusion of the dream. You could call this a rut, and we fall into them, but it goes much deeper than that. Not just your actions, but also your attitudes and your feelings become repetitive. You have formed the habit of being yourself by becoming, in a sense, enslaved to your environment. Your thinking has become equal to the conditions in your life, and thus you, as the quantum observer, are creating a mind that only reaffirms those circumstances into your specific reality. All you are doing is reacting to your external, known, unchanging world. In a very real way, you have become an effect of circumstances outside of yourself. You have allowed yourself to give up control of your destiny. Unlike Bill Murray's character in the movie Groundhog Day, you're not even fighting against the ceaseless monotony of what you're like and what your life has become. Worse, you aren't the victim of some mysterious and unseen force that has placed you in this repetitive loop. You are the creator of the loop. The good news is that since you created this loop, you can choose to end it. The quantum model of reality tells us that to change our lives, we must fundamentally change the ways we think, act, and feel. We must change our state of being, because how we think, feel, and behave is, in essence, our personality. It is our personality that creates our personal reality. So to create a new personal reality, a new life, we must create a new personality. We must become someone else. To change, then, is to think and act greater than our present circumstances, greater than our environment. Before I begin to explore the ways in which you can think greater than your environment and thus break the habit of being yourself, I want to remind you of something. It is possible to think greater than your present reality, and history books are filled with names of people who have done so. Men and women such as Martin Luther King Jr., William Wallace, Marie Curie, Mahatma Gandhi, Thomas Edison, and Joan of Arc. Every one of these individuals had a concept in his or her mind of a future reality that existed as a potential in the quantum field. This vision was alive in their inner world of possibilities beyond the senses, and in time, each of these people made those ideas a reality. As a common thread, they all had a dream, vision, or objective that was much larger than they were. They all believed in a future destiny that was so real in their minds that they began to live as if that dream were already happening. They couldn't see it, hear, taste, smell, or feel it, but they were so possessed in their dream that they acted in a way that corresponded to this potential reality ahead of time. In other words, they behaved as if what they envisioned was already a reality. For example, the imperialist dictum that had India under colonial rule in the early 1900s was demoralizing to Indians. Despite that, Gandhi believed in a reality that wasn't yet present in his people's lives. He wholeheartedly endorsed the concepts of equality, freedom, and non-violence with undying conviction. Even though Gandhi endorsed liberty for all, the reality of tyranny and British control at that time was quite different. The conventional beliefs of that era were in contrast to his hopes and aspirations. Although the experience of liberty was not a reality while he was initially engaged in changing India, he did not let outward evidence of adversity sway him to give up this ideal. For a long time, much of the feedback from the external world didn't show Gandhi that he was making a difference. But seldom did he allow the conditions in his environment to control his way of being. He believed in a future that he could not yet see or experience with his senses, but which was so alive in his mind that he could not live any other way. He embraced a new future life while physically living his present life. He understood that the way he was thinking, acting, and feeling would change the current conditions in his environment. And eventually, reality began to change as a result of his efforts. When our behaviors match our intentions, when our actions are equal to our thoughts, when our minds and our bodies are working together, when our words and our deeds are aligned, there's an immense power behind any individual. The greatest individuals in history were unwaveringly committed to a future destiny without any need for immediate feedback from the environment. It didn't matter to them if they hadn't yet received any sensory indication or physical evidence of the change they wanted. They must have reminded themselves daily of the reality they were focused upon. Their minds were ahead of their present environment because their environment no longer controlled their thinking. Truly, they were ahead of their time. Another fundamental element shared by each of these celebrated beings was that they were clear in their minds about exactly what they wanted to happen. Remember, we leave the how to a greater mind, and they must have all known this. Now, some in their day might have called them unrealistic. In fact, they were completely unrealistic, and so were their dreams. The event they were embracing in thought, action, and emotion was not realistic, because the reality had not yet occurred. The ignorant and the cynical might also have said their vision was nonsense, and such naysayers would have been right. A vision of future reality was nonsense. It existed in a reality beyond the senses. As another example, Joan of Arc was considered foolhardy, even insane. Her ideas challenged the beliefs of her time and made her a threat to the present political system. But once her vision was made manifest, she was considered profoundly virtuous. When one holds a dream independent of the environment, that's greatness. Coming up, we'll see that overcoming the environment is inextricably linked with overcoming the body and time. In Gandhi's case, he was not swayed by what was happening in his outer world, environment. He didn't worry about how he felt and what would happen to him, body. And he didn't care how long it would take to realize the dream of freedom, time. He simply knew that all these elements would sooner or later blend to his intentions. For all of the giants in history, is it possible that their ideas were thriving in the laboratory of their minds to such an extent that to their brains it was as though the experience had already happened? Can you too change who you are by thought alone? Neuroscience has proven that we can change our brains, and therefore our behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs, just by thinking differently. In other words, without changing anything in our environment. Through mental rehearsal, repeatedly imaging, performing an action, the circuits in the brain can reorganize themselves to reflect our objectives. We can make our thoughts so real that the brain changes to look like the event has already become a physical reality. We can change it to be ahead of any actual experience in our external world. Here's an example. In Evolve Your Brain, I discussed how research subjects who mentally rehearsed one-handed piano exercises for 2 hours a day for 5 days, never actually touching any piano keys, demonstrated almost the same brain changes as people who physically performed the identical finger movements on a piano keyboard for the same length of time. Functional brain scans showed that all the participants activated and expanded clusters of neurons in the same specific area of the brain. In essence, the group who mentally rehearsed practicing the scales and chords grew nearly the same number of brain circuits as the group who physically engaged in the activity. The study demonstrates 2 important points. Not only can we change our brains just by thinking differently, but when we are truly focused and single-minded, the brain does not know the difference between the internal world of the mind and what we experience in the external environment. Our thoughts can become our experience. This notion is critical to your success or failure in your endeavor to replace old habits, prune old neural connections, with new ones, sprout new neural connections. So let's look more closely at how the same learning sequence took place in those people who mentally practiced but never physically played any notes. Whether we physically or mentally acquire a skill, there are 4 elements that we all use to change our brains: learning knowledge, receiving hands-on instruction, paying attention, and repetition. Learning is making synaptic connections. Instruction gets the body involved in order to have a new experience, which further enriches the brain. When we also pay attention and repeat our new skill over and over again, our brains will change. The group who physically played the scales and chords grew new brain circuits because they followed this formula. The participants who mentally rehearsed also followed this formula, except they never got their bodies physically involved. In their minds, they were easily able to conceive of themselves playing the piano. Remember, after these subjects repeatedly mentally practiced, their brains showed the same neurological changes as the participants who actually played the piano. New networks of neurons, neural networks, were forged, demonstrating that in effect they had already engaged in practicing the piano scales and chords without actually having that physical experience. We could say that their brains existed in the future, ahead of the physical event of playing the piano. Because of our enlarged human frontal lobe and our unique ability to make thought more real than anything else, the forebrain can naturally lower the volume from the external environment so that nothing else is being processed but a single-minded thought. This type of internal processing allows us to become so involved in our mental imaging that the brain will modify its wiring without having experienced the actual event. When we can change our minds independent of the environment, and then steadfastly embrace an ideal with sustained concentration, the brain will be ahead of the environment. That is mental rehearsal, an important tool in breaking the habit of being ourselves. If we repeatedly think about something to the exclusion of everything else, we encounter a moment when the thought becomes the experience. When this occurs, the neural hardware is rewired to reflect the thought as the experience. This is the moment that our thinking changes our brains and thus our minds. To understand that neurological change can take place in the absence of physical interactions in the environment is crucial to our success in breaking the habit of being ourselves. Consider the larger implications of the finger exercise experiment. If we apply the same process, mental rehearsal, to anything that we want to do, we can change our brains ahead of any concrete experience. If you can influence your brain to change before you experience a desired future event, you will create the appropriate neural circuits that will enable you to behave in alignment with your intention before it becomes a reality in your life. Through your own repeated mental rehearsal of a better way to think, act, or be, you will install the neural hardware needed to physiologically prepare you for the new event. In fact, you'll do more than that. The brain's hardware, as I use the analogy in this book, refers to its physical structures, its anatomy right down to its neurons. If you keep installing, reinforcing, and refining your neurological hardware, the end result of that repetition is a neural network. In effect, a new software program. Just like computer software, this program, for example, a behavior, an attitude, or an emotional state, now runs automatically. Now you've cultivated the brain to be ready for your new experience, and frankly, you have the mind in place so that you can handle the challenge. When you change your mind, your brain changes, and when you change your brain, your mind changes. So when the time comes to demonstrate a vision contrary to the environmental conditions at hand, it is quite possible for you to be already prepared to think and act with a conviction that is steadfast and unwavering. In fact, the more you formulate an image of your behavior in a future event, the easier it will be for you to execute a new way of being. So can you believe in a future you cannot yet see or experience with your senses, but have thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is actually changed to look like the experience has happened ahead of the physical event in your external environment? If so, then your brain is no longer a record of the past, but has become a map to the future. Now that you know you can change your brain by thinking differently, is it possible to change your body to look like it too has had an experience ahead of the actual intended circumstances? Is your mind that powerful? Stay tuned. Chapter 3. Overcoming your body. You do not think in a vacuum. Every time you have a thought, there is a biochemical reaction in the brain. You make a chemical. And as you'll learn, the brain then releases specific chemical signals to the body where they act as messengers of the thought. When the body gets these chemical messages from the brain, it complies instantly by initiating a matching set of reactions, directly in alignment with what the brain is thinking. Then the body immediately sends a confirming message back up to the brain that it's now feeling exactly the way the brain is thinking. To understand this process, how you typically think equal to your body, and how you form a new mind, you first need to appreciate the role that your brain and its chemistry plays in your life. In the last few decades, we've discovered that the brain and the rest of the body interact via powerful electrochemical signals. There is an extensive chemical factory between our ears that orchestrates a myriad of bodily functions. But relax. This is going to be Brain Chemistry 101, and a few terms are all that you need to know. All cells have receptor sites on their exterior surface that receive information from outside their boundaries. When there is a match in chemistry, frequency, and electrical charge between a receptor site and an incoming signal from the outside, the cell gets turned on to perform certain tasks. Refer Figure 3A, Cell Activities. Neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and hormones are the cause and effect chemicals for brain activity and bodily functioning. These three different types of chemicals called ligands, the word ligare means to bind in Latin, connect to, interact with, or influence the cell in a matter of milliseconds. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that primarily send signals between nerve cells, allowing the brain and nervous system to communicate. There are different types of neurotransmitters, and each is responsible for a particular activity. Some excite the brain, others slow it down, while still others make us sleepy or awake. They can tell a neuron to unhook from its current connection or make it stick better to its present connection. They can even change the message as it's being sent to a neuron, rewriting it so that a different message is delivered to all of the connected nerve cells. Neuropeptides. The second type of ligand make up the majority of these messengers. Most are manufactured in a structure of the brain called the hypothalamus. Recent studies show that our immune system also makes them. These chemicals are passed through the pituitary gland, which then releases a chemical message to the body with specific instructions. As neuropeptides make their way through the bloodstream, they attach to the cells of various tissues, primarily glands, and then turn on the third type of ligand, hormones, which further influence us to feel certain ways. Neuropeptides and hormones are the chemicals responsible for our feelings. For our purposes, think of neurotransmitters as chemical messengers, primarily from the brain and mind. Neuropeptides as chemical signalers that serve as a bridge between the brain and the body to make us feel the way we think, and hormones as the chemicals related to feelings, primarily in the body. Refer Figure 3B, Overview of the role of ligands in the brain and body. For example, when you have a sexual fantasy, all three of these factors are called to action. First, as you start to think a few thoughts, your brain whips up some neurotransmitters that turn on a network of neurons, which creates pictures in your mind. These chemicals then stimulate the release of specific neuropeptides into your bloodstream. Once they reach your sexual glands, those peptides bind to the cells of those tissues. They turn on your hormonal system and, presto, things start happening. You've made your fantasy thoughts so real in your mind that your body starts to get prepared for an actual sexual experience ahead of the event. That's how powerfully mind and body are related. But the same means, if you start to think about confronting your teenager over the new dent in the car, your neurotransmitters would start the thought process in your brain to produce a specific level of mind. Your neuropeptides would chemically signal your body in a specific way, and you would begin to feel a bit riled up. As the peptides find their way to your adrenal glands, they would then be prompted to release the hormones adrenaline and cortisol. And now you are definitely feeling fired up. Chemically, your body is ready for battle. As you think different thoughts, your brain circuits fire in corresponding sequences, patterns, and combinations, which then produce levels of mind equal to those thoughts. Once these specific networks of neurons are activated, the brain produces specific chemicals with the exact signature to match those thoughts, so that you can feel the way you were just thinking. Then, when you have great thoughts, or loving thoughts, or joyous thoughts, you produce chemicals that make you feel great, or loving, or joyful. The same holds true if you have negative, fearful, or impatient thoughts. In a matter of seconds, you begin to feel negative, or anxious, or impatient. There's a certain synchronicity that takes place moment by moment between the brain and the body. In fact, as we begin to feel the way we are thinking, because the brain is in constant communication with the body, we begin to think the way we are feeling. The brain constantly monitors the way the body is feeling. Based on the chemical feedback it receives, it will generate more thoughts that produce chemicals corresponding to the way that the body is feeling, so that we first begin to feel the way we think, and then to think the way we feel. Refer Figure 3C, Cycle of Thinking and Feeling. We will delve deeper into this idea throughout the book, but consider that thoughts are primarily related to the mind and the brain, and feelings are connected to the body. Therefore, as the feelings of the body align to thoughts from a particular state of mind, mind and body are now working together as one. And as you'll recall, when the mind and body are in unison, the end product is called a state of being. We could also say that the process of continuously thinking and feeling and thinking creates a state of being which produces effects on our reality. A state of being means that we have become familiar with a mental, emotional state, a way of thinking and a way of feeling, which has become an integral part of our self-identity. And so we describe who we are by how we are thinking and thus feeling, or being in the present moment. I am angry. I am suffering. I am inspired. I am insecure. I am negative. But years of thinking certain thoughts, and then feeling the same way, and then thinking equal to those feelings, the hamster in the wheel, creates a memorized state of being in which we can empathetically declare our I am statement as an absolute. That means we're now at the point when we define ourselves as this state of being. Our thoughts and feelings have merged. For example, we say, I have always been lazy. I am an anxious person. I'm typically uncertain of myself. I have worthiness issues. I'm short-tempered and impatient. I'm really not that smart, and so on. And those particular memorized feelings contribute to our personality traits. Warning: when feelings become the means of thinking, or if we cannot think greater than how we feel, we can never change. To change is to think greater than how we feel. To change is to act greater than the familiar feelings of the memorized self. As a practical example, let's say you're driving to work this morning and you begin to think about the heated encounter you had a few days ago with a coworker. As you think the thoughts associated with that person and that particular experience, your brain starts releasing chemicals that circulate throughout your body. Very quickly, you begin to feel exactly the way you were thinking. You probably become angry. Your body sends a message back to your brain saying, "Yep, I'm feeling really ticked off." Of course, your brain, which constantly communicates with the body and monitors its internal chemical order, is influenced by the sudden change in the way you're feeling. As a result, you begin to think differently. The moment you begin to feel the way you think, then you begin to think the way you feel. You unconsciously reinforce the same feeling by continuing to think angry and frustrated thoughts, which then makes you feel more angry and frustrated. In effect, your feelings are now controlling your thinking. Your body is now driving your mind. As the cycle goes on, your angry thoughts produce more chemical signals to the body, which activate the adrenal chemicals associated with your angry feelings. Now you become enraged and aggressive. You feel flushed. Your stomach is twisted into a knot. Your head pounds and your muscles start to clench. As all those heightened feelings flood the body and change its physiology, this chemical cocktail fires up a set of circuits in the brain, causing you to think equal to those emotions. Now you're telling your associate off 10 different ways in the privacy of your own mind. You indignantly conjure up a litany of past events that validate your present upset, brainstorming through a letter recounting all those complaints you've always wanted to lodge. In your mind, you've already forwarded it to your boss before you can even arrive at work. You exit the car dazed and crazed and a breath away from homicidal. Hello, a walking, talking model of an angry person. And all of this started with a single thought. In this moment, it seems impossible to think greater than you feel. And that's why it's so hard to change. The result of this cyclic communication between your brain and body is that you tend to react predictably to these kinds of situations. You create patterns of the same familiar thoughts and feelings. You unconsciously behave in automatic ways, and you are mired in these routines. This is how the chemical you functions. Why is it so hard to change? Imagine that your mother loved to suffer, and through long observation you unconsciously saw that this behavior pattern enabled her to get what she wanted in life. Let's also say that you've had a few tough experiences in your own life, which created quite a bit of suffering for you. Those memories still elicit an emotional reaction, centered around a specific person at a particular place at a certain time in your life. You've thought about the past often enough, and somehow those memories are easy to recall, even automatic. Now imagine that for more than 20 years you have practiced thinking and feeling and thinking about suffering. Actually, you no longer need to think about the past event to create the feeling. You can't seem to think or act any other way than how you always feel. You've memorized suffering by your recurrent thoughts and feelings, those related to that incident as well as other events in your life. Your thoughts about yourself and your life tend to be colored by feelings of victimization and self-pity. Repeating the same thoughts and feelings you've courted for more than 20 years has conditioned your body to remember the feeling of suffering without much conscious thought. This seems so natural and normal now. It's who you are. And any time you try to change anything about yourself, it's like the road turns back on you. You're right back to your old self. What most people don't know is that when they think about a highly charged emotional experience, they make the brain fire in the exact sequences and patterns as before. They are firing and wiring their brains to the past by reinforcing those circuits into ever more hardwired networks. They also duplicate the same chemicals in the brain and body, in varying degrees, as if they were experiencing the event again in that moment. Those chemicals begin to train the body to further memorize that emotion. Both the chemical results of thinking and feeling and thinking, as well as the neurons firing and wiring together, condition the mind and the body into a finite set of automatic programs. We are capable of reliving a past event over and over, perhaps thousands of times in one lifetime. It's this unconscious repetition that trains the body to remember that emotional state, equal to or better than the conscious mind does. When the body remembers better than the conscious mind, that is when the body is the mind. That is called a habit. Psychologists tell us that by the time we're in our mid-30s, our identity or personality will be completely formed. This means that, for those of us over 35, we have memorized a select set of behaviors, attitudes, beliefs, emotional reactions, habits, skills, associative memories, conditioned responses, and perceptions that are now subconsciously programmed within us. Those programs are running us because the body has become the mind. This means that we will think the same thoughts, feel the same feelings, react in identical ways, behave in the same manner, believe the same dogmas, and perceive reality the same ways. About 95% of who we are by midlife is a series of subconscious programs that have become automatic. Driving a car, brushing our teeth, overeating when we're stressed, worrying about our future, judging our friends, complaining about our lives, blaming our parents, not believing in ourselves, and insisting on being chronically unhappy, just to name a few. Since the body becomes the subconscious mind, it's easy to see that in situations when the body becomes the mind, the conscious mind no longer has much to do with our behavior. The instant we have a thought, feeling, or reaction, the body runs on automatic pilot. We go unconscious. Take, for example, a mother driving a minivan to drop her kids off at school. How is she able to navigate traffic, break up arguments, drink her coffee, shift gears, and help her son blow his nose, and all at once? Much like a computer program, these actions have become automatic functions that can run very fluidly and easily. Mum's body is skillfully doing everything because it has memorized how to do all these deeds through much repetition. She no longer has any conscious thought about how she does them. They are habitual. Think about that. 5% of the mind is conscious, struggling against 95% that is running subconscious automatic programs. We've memorized a set of behaviors so well that we have become an automatic, habitual body-mind. In fact, when the body has memorized a thought, action, or feeling, to the extent that the body is the mind, when the mind and body are one, we are in a state of being the memory of ourselves. And if 95% of who we are by age 35 is a set of involuntary programs, memorized behaviors, and habitual emotional reactions, it follows that 95% of our day we are unconscious. We only appear to be awake. Yikes! So a person may consciously want to be happy, healthy, and free, but the experience of hosting 20 years of suffering and the repeated cycling of those chemicals of pain and pity have subconsciously conditioned the body to be in a habitual state. We live by habit when we are no longer aware of what we're thinking, doing, or feeling. We become unconscious. The greatest habit we must break is the habit of being ourselves. Example, when the body is running the show. Here are some practical illustrations of the body being in a habitual state. Have you ever been unable to consciously remember a phone number? Try as you may, you can't even recall 3 digits out of the string of numbers required to make the call. And yet, you can pick up the phone and watch as your fingers dial the number. Your conscious thinking brain can't remember the numbers, but you've practiced this action so many times with your fingers that your body now knows and remembers better than your brain. That example was for those of us who grew up before speed dial or cell phones came along. Perhaps you've had the same experience with typing your PIN into an ATM or entering a password online. Similarly, I can recall times when I worked out at a gym and had a locker with a combination lock. I was so tired after the workout that I couldn't remember the combination. I'd stare at the dial trying to recall the sequence of 3 numbers, and they wouldn't surface. However, when I started to twirl the dial, the combination would come back to me, almost as if by magic. Again, This happens because we practice something so many times that our bodies knew better than our conscious minds. The body subconsciously has become the mind. Remember that 95% of who we are by age 35 sits in the same subconscious memory system, in which the body automatically runs a programmed set of behaviors and emotional reactions. In other words, the body is running the show. In truth, the body is the servant of the mind. It follows that if the body has become the mind, the servant has become the master, and the former master, the conscious mind, has gone to sleep. The mind might think it's still in charge, but the body is influencing decisions equal to its memorized emotions. Now let's say that the mind wants to get back in control. What do you think the body is going to say? Where have you been? Go back to sleep. I've got it together here. You don't have the will, the persistence, or the awareness to do what I have been doing all this time, while you were unconsciously following my orders. I even modified my receptor sites over the years in order to serve you better. You thought you were running things while I've been influencing you all along and urging you to make all your decisions equal to what feels right and familiar. And when the 5% that is conscious is going against 95% that is running subconscious automatic programs, the 95% is so reflexive that it only takes one stray thought or a single stimulus from the environment to turn on the automatic program again. Then we're back to the same old, thinking the same thoughts, performing the same actions, but expecting something different to happen in our lives. When we try to regain control, this is when the body signals the brain to begin talking us out of our conscious goals. Our internal chatter comes up with a battery of reasons why we should not attempt to do anything out of the ordinary, not break out of the habituated state of being that we're used to.